I just said, it's all been done. It's all been done better. It's all been done by somebody the world actually wants to pay attention to. I can't start until it's perfect. I can't start until I'm perfect. What if I start and the critics come? What if they say, who does she think she is? I can't start until I have the perfect blueprint. I can't start until I know every step in the staircase. What if I start and I can't stay consistent with it? What if I don't have the bandwidth? What if my voice doesn't really matter? What if I don't really matter? What if it's already too late? And I said, fear is not your friend. Start anyway. Start now. Fear's a really boring liar.
Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the Trailblazer Talks podcast. I'm excited to introduce you to this week's guest, Mary Marantz. She is a best-selling author, speaker, podcast host who helps generation changers quit playing small. And she truly is a trailblazer, and I'm super excited to have this conversation with her. So Mary, thank you so much for being on the show, and tell the listeners a bit about you.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Courtney, thanks so much for having me. I've been super looking forward to this ever since we got it on the calendar. For everybody who is listening and maybe meeting me for the first time, I always kind of joke like the elevator pitch version of my story, or like the movie trailer version, is that I grew up in a very, very single wide trailer in rural West Virginia. And I say very, very because a lot of times people hear trailer in West Virginia and they can imagine sort of a really nice double wide with like a permanent foundation. Like whatever stock photo you have in your head of dilapidated trailer in Appalachia, like that's basically it. If you want to see it exactly, you can go to thebookdirt.com. That's the website for my first book, Dirt, which tells the story of growing up in that trailer. That's the actual trailer I grew up in. My husband, Justin, is a photographer, and he took that photo the first time I took him home to meet my family. And it is just basically like a tin can. It does still exist on the top of Fenwick Mountain. And so, you fast forward from that beginning where, the trailers in the 1980s were not built to last. And my dad's a logger, so he would track mud into the brown shag carpeting. And we had stray animals who would go inside just as much as they go outside. So I say, you don't know where the brown shag carpeting ended and the dirt began. But for as me and my story, it always started with dirt. And then you fast forward in that story, and I go on to Yale for law school. It's sort of like Seinfeld, like yada, yada. I end up at Yale for law school, And on one hand, it's like, that's a kind of surprising outcome for that sort of start in life. But on the other hand, in a very real way, Courtney, we as a society, I think, are very familiar with that underdog trope, right? We've seen that movie. We've read that book. There are a lot of humble beginnings to the Ivy League or some sort of, super success story where we really do like to kind of, in that reels fashion, sort of skip to the good part. And so that kind of brings me to sitting here with you today. I mean, we're again really fast forwarding through some parts, but the first book, Dirt, was about sort of the movie version of my life. There was a second book called Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots. And now this third book, Underestimated, is sort of the companion to Dirt, in the sense that if that's the story, and I sort of think aloud for the reader of how that story made me feel, like this is how I am. Underestimated kind of becomes almost like, I'm lovingly calling it like the textbook companion that tells us why we are the way we are. But it's a lot more fun than a textbook, I promise.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I love that. Whenever you released like the title of the book and started putting out the content that came with the book, I was like, I feel like she is like reading my mind right now of things that I struggle with. And I think we all do.
Mm.
But before we get to that part, I do want to go back to kind of like your story and what you just talked about. And I know you've talked about that you've had this belief kind of since maybe, I don't know how little you were when you started having this belief, but just that you knew you were meant for more.
Mm.
Going from West Virginia to that trailer to Yale, and that's why I introduced you as a trailblazer too, because you have just blazed this trail for yourself and just been obedient to the things that God's called you to. I'd love to just talk a little bit about how you developed that self-belief and just kind of how you kept trudging along on that path forward.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I love this question because it's kind of a topic I've become a little bit fascinated with. Most of the people, like famous people, celebrity people, or just like public figure people that we would all know the names of, the ones that I resonate with most, even before I know their story, there's just this thing about them and like a light about them, we'll call it. And I actually, just to give you kind of an idea of how wild this is, I did a podcast down in Nashville and I'd never met this podcaster before in my entire life. We did not know each other. And he came down to meet me in the parking garage where my Uber had dropped me off. And he came walking up to me and, said hello. And I knew without him saying a word about this topic that he had also grown up in a trailer. And I don't know how I knew, but I just knew. And I told him this, and we had a whole big conversation about it in the episode. And I kind of said it's this sort of like game recognized game kind of idea. And so, like, there are celebrities. I'm thinking of like Viola Davis, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, a little bit of Oprah, a little bit of Tyler Perry, where there's just something about growing up without a lot. I joke in Dirt that I'm not really joking that much. It just does something to your brain. And the first thing that it does to your brain is it makes you expect to fail before you even start. But in this really weird way, Courtney, it also kind of gives you this I'm going to get out drive. And so there is a book, and I reference it in Underestimated. It's called The Triple Package. And it was actually written by 2 Yale law professors who were there when I was there. I took one of them for constitutional law. And the book is essentially premised on like the subtitles, like the 3 unlikely traits that determine success in America, basically. That's not the exact subtitle, but that's really what it boils down to, like what groups actually become successful. And they say that it's these kind of like paradoxical, seemingly in contention traits of number 1, they call it a superiority. I don't actually love that word because when we hear superiority, we think better than other people. I think when you really look at how they're describing it, what they're talking about is that feeling of feeling like you're being called up to more. And so I've been talking about this book and I've been saying it's for the people who feel like they're being called up to greatness. They're being called up to more. They've maybe had that since their whole lives. And they simultaneously feel like they will never get there because it's them. And so the second characteristic is this insecurity, this chip on their shoulder, this, because of where I come from, I'm afraid I'll never be able to do it. Therefore, I will go do it just to prove it wrong. And so this feeling of more and this feeling of insecurity kind of battle against each other in this friction that produces drive. And then the third characteristic is just a willingness to delay instant gratification for future rewards. So that's a lot of information all at once. But the idea is that I don't know what it is, but there is something about people who didn't grow up with a lot. Not all of us, for sure. Some people see that and they go, well, that's the way it is. That's the way it was. That's the way it always will be. But there's a subset of us that we just feel like we cannot stop. And in Dirt, and again in Slow Growth, I called this feeling the girl in the red cape. We're running out of the deep, dark woods, the big bad wolf ripping at our heels. We run and don't stop running because we know if we stop, it just might kill us until finally, breathless and at last exhausted, I look back over my shoulder and I can finally see it. I am the girl in the red cape, but I'm also the wolf. And that voice in my head telling me to run and not stop running, that voice is my own. And so that was like 7 different hopscotches between the 3 books, but like that's how my brain works. And that's really kind of like the fullest answer is I don't know exactly why it happens or why it happens to some people who don't grow up with a lot and not others. But there is definitely like a group of us and we don't know how to stop, Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think too, even just depending on like what we were told growing up too, or if we were picked on or whatever, because I relate to that in the sense that I didn't grow up with a ton, but I also always kind of felt like I was like the runt of the class, kind of, so to speak, of,
Yeah.
I was underestimated, like your book says, people
Yeah.
are always like, oh, she's the quiet kid, or she's just kind of meek and things like that. And so I definitely relate to that. And I had that sense, and I had to kind of balance it in a way of, I had that sense of, I want to prove them wrong, but I want to do it for the right reasons. Because I think at some point I had that thought of, oh, I want to prove them wrong. I want to move to New York City, or I want to do this big thing with my life. And I contemplated law school at one point in time in
Okay.
my life. I didn't end up
Nice.
going. I went the creative route. But yeah, I think we all have kind of that crossroads at some time whenever we grow up with those different things of feeling like, okay, I know that I'm called to more, or I know that I want to do more, or I just want to prove them wrong because they said I couldn't. And now
Yeah.
it's like a challenge. But I do want to talk more about your book, Underestimated, and just kind of that main takeaway, and just give us the summary of the book. What can people expect from the book? And what do you hope they walk away with from this book?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I sat down to write this book, I'm going to be honest with you that I 100% thought it was going to be 100% a book about when other people do this to us. I really genuinely thought that was kind of the earliest, foggiest iteration of this idea. And as I sat down to write, I've said multiple times, like, I'm just in absolute unqualified awe that this idea picked me, in that very sort of Liz Gilbert, big magic way. It tapped me on the shoulder and said, do you want to enter into a contract for me to get made into the world? And I can't believe it picked me. I can't believe I was paying enough attention when it did that I said, yes, absolutely. And then every day I was writing, I was like, let me get this all the way across the finish line to this thing to be the fullest iteration, the most complete version of itself. It always wanted to be lacking for nothing. Let me be a good, contract partner to this idea. And so as we began, me and the idea and God, to get this down on the page, that idea had opinions. And the idea said to me, like, it's going to be 20% that. It's going to be 20% when other people do this to us, because let's be clear, that's a thing. We're not going to gaslight ourselves and say, no, everybody's like either A, rooting for you, or that whole like, oh, nobody's thinking about you the way that you think they are. That's true of some people. And then there are other people who are watching everything you do, front row seats, because they want to see you fail. I saw a thing the other day that was like, the first person to watch your story is your biggest hater. And I don't think that has to be true, but I laughed out loud at that, because there are people who watch every move and never say a word. So all of that to say, as I started to write it, the idea said to me, it's going to be 80% when you do it to yourself. And so on the cover, there are a bunch of fun different Easter eggs. I just did a post on my Instagram about, but one of them is above that title, underestimated, in really small letters. It says, because the person counting you out the most just might be you. And I think that's where the real transformational work of this book happens, because we can't really actually control what other people do, how other people see us. We can sort of teach people how to treat us, and we can hold boundaries, and we can, gently correct when they call our work little or whatever it is. But really, the only person in the room we have the true control over in terms of how we behave is ourselves. And so for everybody listening, to catch you up, this book is premised on the idea that fear is a really boring liar. I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And so each chapter is actually a different face, a different mask that fear puts on as it shapeshifts through its different, repertoire of there are 14 chapters. So we go through 14 of them. Each chapter has a few smaller ones. So I don't know what the final total count is, but it's not an infinite amount of ways that it can show up. It is not a very creative force, which we'll talk about more in a second. And so we have people pleasing, procrastination, imposter syndrome, overthinking, even a fear of success, 14 in total. Self-sabotage is chapter 3. And so toe-to-toe, chapter by chapter, this is the systematic takedown of fear we've all been waiting for, because I'm just so sick to death of how fear attacks all of my favorite people, including myself. I'm one of my favorite people, in the same boring ways. And we, as these exceptional, talented, gifted women with a purpose and good work prepared for us in advance and people to go help, let it win every time. And so this ends with this book. And so the most kind of bullseye target reader, putting our couple of questions together, is for the person who's doing that and allowing fear to do that, because something in their story told them that it wasn't safe to trust anybody, including themselves.
Yeah, I've already read, I haven't finished reading it, but I read most of it, and it's just so good. I was glad to get to read into it, because it's a message that I mentioned that I also need. I think most of the listeners need, especially just in this current day and age. I think we've always dealt with fear, but with social media and just everything else going on top of that, I think that voice of fear can just grow louder and louder. And especially if we, with working at home sometimes, or just we unintentionally isolate ourselves, where that voice can get louder, because we don't have as many other people on our day-to-day that are helping us squash it. So I love just the whole premise of it. And there was a line towards the beginning of the book that you said, words can either be a lifeline or a lifelong curse. And that line really resonates. I was like, that's so good. Like, it's true. Like, they can be a lifeline or they can be a curse. I would love to dig into that a little bit of like, how can we rework our thinking towards our words, and how can we prevent them from being that curse, and how can we help them be more of a lifeline?
Yeah.
Hey friends, interrupting this episode for just a moment to let you know about the resources that my company, Little Creative Company, offers. We love bringing clarity to your calling and mission through building a stronger online presence for you. With our 2-week website packages, branding, marketing strategy, and SEO services will help you increase your impact for the kingdom. If your DIY brand is ready for an upgrade, let us help you take it to the next level. Send us an email at hello@littlecreativecompany.com or visit our website at littlecreativecompany.com. You can also find the links in the show notes. Okay, now back to today's conversation.
So much, so much. So that line originated in dirt. So there's a section where I'm like, most people hear a story like trailer to Yale law and they get interested in the upward explosion of mobility. Me, I got interested in the spark that came the generation before. And so both of my parents barely graduated high school. My dad wouldn't have unless his parents forced him to, because he started working in the woods as a logger when he was 12. And he was more than happy to go full time rather than finish out high school. And my mom came home one day at 15 and had a letter from her mom that said, "You're old enough to take care of yourself now. The bills are paid through the end of the month. Good luck."
Wow.
And so they are both people who, as hard as my story was, in so many ways, their story was harder. And, my mom didn't have running water in her house when she was growing up.
Wow.
So that's pretty wild, that she would get one pair of shoes a year. So we hear that and we think like, what was this, 1883? But no, this was literally one generation ago.
Yeah.
So when I chased the dominoes backwards, if we think about dominoes falling and they end at Yale Law School, what was the first one that tipped? The thing that I believe set me up on a different trajectory was that my dad saw me growing up in the same yard he grew up in, because they just parked that trailer on the backyard of my grandparents' house. Going to the same Sunday school he went to, about to start the same kindergarten at New Hope Elementary School that was so small, Courtney. 3rd and 4th shared a room, 5th and 6th shared a room, kindergarten and 1st shared a room, and 2nd got a room to themselves inexplicably. I don't know why. And so really teeny tiny elementary school to begin with. It shut down and we consolidated to a bigger grade school that was still pretty small. And when he started kindergarten, the first week, he was not prepared at all. My grandparents didn't really set him up in any way. And he got called on and he got the answer wrong and the whole class laughed. And that is literally all that it took, literally, for him to start to wear the label of stupid. I'm just not good at school. For the rest of his life, one incident like that. That's how dangerous labels are. That's how dangerous these names that we don't speak out loud to hear how ridiculous they are. That's how much power they have. And that's the work of this book. Let's name the fear and move forward. Anyway, so when I was about to start kindergarten, he said, "This ends with me." He saw me starting on a similar trajectory. Same yard, same Sunday school, same elementary school. And so there were these workbooks at the time in the 1980s at the grocery store that you could get right on the racks as you were checking out. And the idea was that you would get them for whatever grade your kid was going into. They had them in reading and math. And so he started with kindergarten. And when I finished that, we went to 1st grade. And then we went to 2nd grade, and so on and so on. So that when I started kindergarten, I was actually in a 6th grade reading and a 5th grade math level. And so you start kindergarten that far prepared, and they call you smart. They call you gifted. And study after study shows that kids will rise up to the labels that are put on them. And so in so many ways, that one flip of the script in my story versus his story becomes I rise up to everything that was being called out in me. Right. That became a lifeline to come above my circumstances. Whereas for him, it became this kind of curse, this thing that he wore. And then you take mine to the extreme, because we're having nuanced conversations here on Trailblazer Talks. We're not about the simple answers, is that it was a lifeline that got me out of my circumstances, but it also became, as an adult, a lifelong curse, because it became, I am nothing if I'm not performing, if I'm not exceeding expectations, if I'm not the A plus plus person in the room. And so there's been, 20 years or so of work trying to unravel myself from that label. Like anything in extreme one way or the other becomes a curse. The blessing is sort of in that moderation of identity, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I had never thought about it that way, that can also be a curse on the flip side, because I've dealt with that too, being in like the gifted class and being kind of that perfectionist and being on this like pedestal sometimes with family, that puts a lot of pressure on you to be like, oh, I've got to be the perfect kid. I've got to do this. And then when you get to be an adult, you're like, oh no, like if I mess up at work or whatever, it can be a curse. And I've had to undo some of that as well. And there was another line that I really resonated with, and you actually had posted about it. I think it was earlier, or maybe it was last week, because I commented on it. And you talked about, if you wait for the world to approval or co-signature before you do a thing, I promise you'll be waiting for a very long time. And then in your Instagram post, you said there's no trophy for waited her turn.
That's right.
And I loved that. And I would love to talk a little bit about how can we kind of overcome that thought. to move forward into the things that God's called us to. Because I know a lot of us, especially people like myself and others like me, who we were taught like, you got to wait your turn and you got to wait, someone's
Yeah,
got, like, you're very susceptible to that, versus there's a lot of people who they'll just go get it. Like, they don't care if you waited your turn or whatever, they're going to jump in front of you. And then there's us kind of polite. I think we both are INFJs, and like we
that's
will
right.
wait our
Yes.
turn sometimes unless someone tells us. What
Hmm.
advice would you give in that regard?
Yeah, so I actually would like, if it's okay, I want to read like
Yeah,
one paragraph from
yeah,
the
do it.
book. This is yep. This is chapter 12. Criticism is an inside job. And I won't read all of this part because it gets a little long, but it's starting off talking about how when I started law school, one of the very first lessons we learned on the very first day was that good lawyers don't ask questions they don't already know the answers to. And I say, as a guiding principle, don't ask questions you don't already know the answers to leads us to a pretty fluorescent lit existence. This is talking about, I'll back up one sentence. It's one of those very specific rules for a very specific set of circumstances that runs the very specific risk of being absorbed into the wide open expanse of the rest of your once wild, untamed life. As a guiding principle, don't ask questions you don't already know the answers to leads us to a pretty fluorescent lit existence. We know this. If there was a version of life that equated to sitting alone on a cold metal table in a paper gown, your bare feet dangling mere inches above the Clorox streaked floor, still wet from the mop, clutching at all these see-through seams now desperate for closure, all while trying in vain to keep your most vulnerable parts hidden, this would be it. You sit very still and try not to move around too much, lest the crinkle of the paper be a bother to anybody. Rule number 2, don't ever be a bother to anybody. You sit straight up and plaster a too big smile on your overly tired face at every hint of a footstep falling just outside the door, this absolute buffoonery of an aw shucks good girl sideshow act now gone hopelessly awry at the rote repetition and rehearsal of it all, as if they are secretly handing out gold stars for how well you waited your turn. Meanwhile, a standard industrial tube light flickers overhead and casts a sickly green pall over everything that's meant to keep you safe. Oh, sure, it's a sanitary life. A bleak, antiseptic, paper thin, neat and tidy life. It smells of freshly opened packages of sterile gauze, and it's always 10 degrees colder than it should be. It is a life absolutely disinfected of anything that could ever get you into too much trouble. But it's not where the magic happens. And so it is this kind of idea, that's in chapter 12, like I said, but we also have chapter 9. People pleasing is a lonely intersection that exists at the crosshair intersection of waited her turn and paid her dues. And we actually believe, and I believe this for years, that if we were just excellent enough, if we were just patient enough, if we just paid enough of our dues, then we would reach some sort of arrival moment where arrival is determined by external permission and validation. And someone would tap us on the forehead, tap us on the shoulder, tap to like that post, and they would look us in the eye and say, "You got it, kid. You're going to be one of the ones who make it." And just like that, we would have arrived, right? And so that chapter starts off with, there is no there, as in, I'm not there yet. So yeah, 100%, 100%. Like, we actually think that us taking ourselves out of the game or pushing other people into the spotlight while we shrink back into corners when we really want to raise our hand, that our aw shucks good girl sideshow act will finally get people to say to us, hey, maybe you should step up.
Mm-hmm.
And that very rarely happens. It
Yeah.
very rarely happens. It happens with coaches and visionaries and the people who see where people are headed. They'll go, hey, when are you going to write the book? And you'll have a few of those people speak into your life, but mostly 99.9% of the population can only see a thing once it's done. And so if
Mm-hmm.
you're waiting for them to co-sign, you're going to be waiting a very long time.
Yeah. No, I remember this quote. I think you know my friend Rachel Autry. You've
Yeah.
been on her podcast, and she and I used to live in Birmingham, Alabama, and so I met her way back when I lived there, and she had said something recently that kind of goes with that, where she was saying sometimes you have to put your own foot in the door. She was talking about how she took her kids to, I guess, daycare,
Mm.
and there was someone like a few steps ahead of her, I guess, that didn't see her. And so she was like, had all her stuff in her arms and was running forward. And they didn't hold the door because they didn't know she was right there. And she had to like shove her foot in the door to like open the door for herself. And she
Yeah.
was like, and it's not stepping where you don't need to be. It's just sometimes people don't know that you need to be in that place or that room or whatever it is. I was like, that makes so much
Yeah.
sense. And that kind of reminded me when you said we don't need to wait
Mm-hmm.
our turn or wait for permission because we'll be waiting a long time. And I know you
Mm-hmm.
also talk about going from stuck to start. And focusing on simple shifts, which I think goes with the theme of like not waiting our turn and just stepping in obedience into what we're called to do. What are some practical tips of going from stuck to start that can help us?
Yeah. Well, before I even jump into that, I just have to take a moment. What a great analogy about like they're not trying to slam the door on you. They just
Yeah.
don't know you exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh, how many times have we felt like that? And like they have to know we exist before we can walk through that door. That's really the kind of, if you really say it out loud, that's sort of the lie of waiting for permission. And there's a script that I talk about in the book that I tell myself when it's like, as I said earlier, 99.9% of people will only be able to see a thing once it's done. And so their lack of vision about where you're headed has absolutely zero bearing on the fact that God is calling you there.
Mm.
Right? Like we do not need them to co-sign the purpose and the good work he has for you. And so the script I tell myself in times like that is that's okay. You'll
Mm.
meet them later.
Mm.
And it's very, the work of my life right now, Courtney, is to say it in that tone and not, that's okay. You'll meet them later, with the anger and the bitterness or whatever. It needs to be said with like a surrender and I release you when you come back around, not
Yes.
like
Yes.
I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
Because as I talk many times about in the book, proving people wrong is terrible jet fuel. Like it works instantly, it gets you results, but man, will it leave you a burned out hollow shell of yourself in the end.
Yeah.
So I really love that. And so I just wanted to have a moment for
Yeah.
that and for our friend Rachel Autry, who we love. Yeah, moving from stuck to start in the shifts. This is a little bit of a big answer, so I'm going to start it and then breathe so that if you have questions or you want to kind of interject, because otherwise it will become a 45-minute monologue. So there are a few different things I like to talk about with this idea, which is so ironic as we are answering the question about simple shifts. I'm like, well, it's going to be a 45-minute dissertation.
Yeah.
So the short version of the shifts, again, keeping everybody caught up. Chapter 1 chapter 1 and 2 really lay out the problem. So chapter 1 is starting over as a rolling boulder. And it's for all of us who feel like, for whatever reason, everything we have tried to do seems like it's so much harder for us than it seems to be for other people. Like they just implement, execute, achieve, Elwood style. What? Like it's hard. And for some of us, it just takes longer. We keep pushing this boulder all the way up to the hill, almost to our breakthrough moment. And at the last minute, we blink and we lose our grip and we lose our way, and the boulder rolls all the way back down the mountain. And we don't know why. We keep starting over. Why do we keep doing this to ourselves just as we're about to get a little bit of traction? And then chapter 2 is just like, I want some people to understand some things about the character of fear, like the integrity or lack thereof of fear, and some rules that it's going to be kind of held to as we go through the rest of them. So chapter 3 is kind of where the real work of the book in terms of unraveling that begins. And that's chapter 3, self-sabotage is a shot glass. It has nothing to do with drinking alcohol. I follow really cheesy success accounts on Instagram with ones with lions and Lamborghinis, roar until you get everything you came for. Mostly is like a hate follow because I like to make fun of them in my head. Like, scripty quotes with Albert
Yeah.
Einstein that he definitely never said.
Posters in the corporate world that has like that like person climbing the mountain says leader.
Yes. Or like the guy getting off the private jet with like his sunglasses, and it's like, you rented that by the hour, didn't you?
Yeah.
Like it didn't even leave the ground. This was like one of those Instagram content deals. Because it's just the world we live in. It's all smoke and mirrors, right? Anyway, there was this one post from one of these accounts that was not anything like that. And it was a quick scroll by, but it was basically a picture of a shot glass. And it said, if you think you have the capacity of a shot glass, every time you get a little bit more than that, you will subconsciously shrink yourself back down. And I added, until you fit back into the tiny containers you believe you belong in. And the post goes on to say, the goal is to expand the capacity for what you believe you can hold well. I don't even know if it said well, that's probably me adding it. Expand it until it's an infinity pool. And it's like, of course it had to be an infinity pool from this account, but it was the clearest explanation of self-sabotage I'd ever seen. And very shortly after that, I had Dr. Allison Cook on my podcast, who, if you have not had on your show, you should absolutely have her on. She's phenomenal. She wrote the book, The Best of You, and also I Shouldn't Feel This Way. This was back when The Best of You had just come out. And I said, listen, Allison, how do we stop doing this to ourselves if we don't even realize we're doing it most of the time? Like, yeah, we're pushing the boulder up the mountain. Yeah, we keep dropping it and it keeps rolling back down. But it's not like we're going, I will now drop this boulder. I've worked so hard at pushing up this hill. It just seems to keep happening. And she said, we pulled up this part of her book that said, like, if you grew up in a situation where there was something that flipped that switch of survival mode, whether it was like chaos and instability or just like this feeling of feeling like the runt of the litter or the overlooked one or whatever it was, that you will subconsciously sort of return to that over and over again because it's familiar. And she said, you can actually reteach yourself a sense of safety as a grown-up. And you do that by setting small but important commitments to yourself and actually keeping them. So small, manageable, but they have to matter to you, important. And then the integrity of actually keeping those promises to yourself. And as you do that, she looked me right in the lens, right through the camera, and said, Mary, as you do that, keeping promises to yourself, both big and small, you are showing yourself that there is a grown-up in the room who can be trusted. That grown-up is you. And so I'm going to pause there. I can keep answering that if you're interested, where I talk about how that translates to this section that comes immediately after that chapter called The Shift, where that sort of sets up every chapter then ends in a shift. But that alone was sort of one of the earliest glimmers of this book of
Yeah.
like, that's it. That's why we keep starting over. And I kind of define capacity in that section. We as Christians can get uncomfortable with like words like self-trust and self-help, because we're like, but my help does not come from myself. My trust does not come from myself. And I draw a distinction between little t trust and big T trust. Like my ultimate trust is in God. My ultimate hope is in God. But there is also this little t trust we don't talk enough about, which I just define as stewardship. It's the
Yeah.
belief that what we are given, we will actually respond to and hold space for and navigate well with wisdom, that we won't mess it up, that we won't make it all about us, that we won't mismanage it into the ground. And so that's kind of the backbone of the origins of the shift. And so I'll pause there to see if anything came up for you. And if not, I can say the rest of it, or we can move on either way.
Yeah, no, I have been learning more and more that a lot of it boils back down to our mindset. And I think as Christians, like you were saying, we so often can almost shift it to God and just be like, oh, well, if God wanted it to happen, or if God this,
Right.
or we can be like, why trust in God? So then I don't have to trust in myself. And then like
Right.
we almost dismiss the fact that no, like we still need to like ourselves, and like we can't just like go through life being like, well, it's like almost like a false sense of humility,
Yes.
where we just be like, well, I'm a Christian, and so I don't have to trust in me, I trust in God. But then God's be like, well, I made you though. Like I made
Right.
you this beautiful human who I want you to like yourself because I like you. And just the mindset thing is something that I am also still learning too, that it's so sneaky, and it kind of goes into what I want to talk about after this with the fear being a liar. But it
Yeah.
is that sneaky thing where we don't sometimes, because we're so close to it, with it being our mindset, we don't
Right.
realize it's our mindset.
Yeah. And I would add to that, like, there's like this fear of I'm going to be prideful. Like
Yeah.
women in general, Christian women in particular, are really afraid to raise their hand because they don't want to seem like in any way they're doing anything to look, I'm making it about me. I'm being prideful. And I go back, Courtney, to I find a lot of like epiphany moments in the parable of the talents. I've had a bunch of them throughout my life. One of them being like, oh, wait, if you look at the multiplication, it was 1-to-1. The one
Mm-hmm.
with 5 came back with 10. The one with 2 came back with 4. The one with 1 did not do that. But like maybe we weren't asked to be multiplying to the tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions we think is all that matters. Maybe it was just to do for the one.
Yeah.
So that's one of them, but that's not what we're talking about right now. But when we go to that parable of the talents, something really interesting I noticed this time around was the one who's handing out the talents gives them and then leaves, and does not leave behind a step-by-step blueprint instruction for exactly how to do it, and does not say, here, give that to me, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Right? Leaves and says, I'm curious to see what you do with what I've given you. And I'm going to come back in a little while and we're going to see.
Yeah.
And when we go there, then it's very convicting because so many people are waiting for the perfect step-by-step instructions, or they think, gosh, another version of God's got this is God doesn't have to use me, so there's somebody else he can always use.
Yeah.
And it's like, but that's not the point. He asked you to do it.
Yeah.
He made this work for you before you were ever born.
Yeah.
And it's an obedience issue that you're not doing it, regardless
Yeah.
of if somebody else could step in, sure. But we want you to do it.
Yeah.
So I find that just so fascinating. And it's like this, exactly what you said. It's this false humility,
It is.
but that's actually an obedience problem.
Yeah. No, I agree with the obedience problem. I was sitting here thinking that I was like, we're being disobedient. And if God has called us to something, no matter how big or small it seems, whether it is in the public eye or whether it's just at your local church or just in your family, no one ever sees it. But if God's asked you to do something, us shying away from it and not doing it, or not putting ourselves out there because we're just like that fake humility, or that scared of, oh, what if I look prideful? It's keeping us stuck. And I know
Yeah.
you also kind of talk about with the sense of stuck and starting as just start taking little steps of like, just start.
That's
And
right.
I don't know if you have anything else with that you would add before we
Yeah.
jump
Yeah.
onto the fear topic, but
Yeah, I'll just round out that shift conversation, which is so chapter 3 wraps up, and then there's a breakout page. There's a few breakout double pages throughout the book. There's the shift, Scenic Overlook 1, Scenic Overlook 2, and the summit. That sort of are these places along the climb up the mountain for us to pause and breathe and take in the view of how far we've come and rest before how far we still have to go. And so the shift basically says that I'd read an article once that said the best ideas are a switch, not a dial. So they don't just turn the volume up on what we were already thinking. They find a way to flip that thinking on its very head. And the traditional wisdom, the, sort of girl boss, Nike approach to coaching, just do it.
mm-hmm.
Wisdom is that the opposite of playing small is just go big, swing for the fences, leap and the net will appear, which is just terrible aeronautics advice. That's not how that works. So, I mean, I get that. I'm being silly. I get the analogy, the net appear moments, to be clear. But it makes it feel like if you're not waking up every day and, going on Oprah, then you're living a small life or what have you. And then we get into conversations, especially among Christian women, where it's like, well, what's wrong with small? Maybe I want to stay small. And they confuse a content life or a purposeful life or a simple life with playing small. This is a very different thing. You can be playing incredibly, incredibly purposefully in your life, and it can still look like a very simple, small life to the outside. And I don't have a problem with that if that's where you're being called. Playing small is just not doing the work. You were in your bones, you were created to do it, nudges you every day, and it's
Mm-hmm.
in danger of walking away from you and you forfeiting the opportunity. Because, by the way, back to the parable of the talents, the one who buried it to keep it safe got it taken away.
Yeah.
So, anywho,
Yeah.
the traditional wisdom is go big, overnight success. Look at
Yeah.
my many followers. Look at my millions of dollars I make every second on Instagram, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And paradoxically, going back to what Dr. Allison Cook taught us, is that some of the most important work we're going to do to quit playing small, ironically, is to start small. Because I've had a lot of go big days in my life, Courtney. I've had get into Yale days. I've had sign a 5-book deal with my publisher days. I've had coast to coast speaking tour days. And we don't talk enough about what happens the day after our hero gets everything they ever wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of those things felt like things that happened to me, not who I was. And so the very next day I went back to doubting myself. It's sort of this difference between goals and intention. You set a goal, you celebrate on one day, the day the goal actually is achieved. Whereas if you follow intentions and every day you wake up and you say, who do I have to be today in order to become the person who can one day stand in that goal? Then every day you do that is a day you can celebrate. And so that's really what we're talking about here. This is this idea of it getting into your bones, it becoming a very part of your identity, doing it long enough and slow enough and small enough that it actually becomes who you are, so that when the windfall days happen, you have the craft and the character and the backbone and the integrity to support that kind of spotlight.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the shift, is we're
Yeah.
actually going to start small.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, I do want to talk about the fear part because obviously that's kind of the whole theme of the book is
Yeah.
conquering that fear. And I know as fellow creative and myself being an author and speaker and I have my own creative studio, you talk about this in relation to creatives a lot as well, but anyone who can relate to it. But I want to talk about fear being a boring liar.
Yeah.
And just tell us a little bit about that and how we can tackle that in our lives.
Yeah. So in addition to being an author and a podcast host and a speaker, I also coach women who want to do those things. And there was a time a couple years ago where I just had a bunch of back-to-back coaching calls, and it was like, it was spooky how call after call after call, they were basically saying the exact same thing of how fear was attacking them. But they weren't saying like fear's attacking me and saying this. They were just saying the fear things,
Yeah.
oh, it's already been done. Who's ever going to care about this? Etc. And so I saw it attacking them in the same ways and almost exactly in the same stage in the process. It was like an existential crisis right on time. And it was attacking me in very similar ways as well. And so I just really got mad and fed up with it one day. And I took out my phone, no introduction at all. I just said, it's all been done. It's all been done better. It's all been done by somebody the world actually wants to pay attention to. I can't start until it's perfect. I can't start until I'm perfect. What if I start and the critics come? What if they say, who does she think she is? I can't start until I have the perfect blueprint. I can't start until I know every step in the staircase. What if I start and I can't stay consistent with it? What if I don't have the bandwidth? What if my voice doesn't really matter? What if I don't really matter? What if it's already too late? And I said, fear is not your friend. Start anyway. Start now. Fear's a really boring liar. And that moment, which really kind of took off, as a post, because everybody was like, all of them, what's happening? Like, why are you reading my email? It sort of like opened the door to this epiphany moment, this, two dots connecting in the back of your limbic brain in a way that you've never seen them connected before, the high that every writer is chasing. And it was, what if fear attacks creatives because it is jealous that it itself is not creative at all?
Mm-hmm.
And I have said this on obviously a bunch of podcasts, but I've said this next part in particular on a handful of them. And I feel like people are kind of like, oh, I kind of get it, but it's yet to really sort of like really land hard with somebody. And that is, if we think about God, where one of the most forward-facing attributes of his character is that he is a creative being.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's the first thing we learn about him, really. And we, being made in his image, are therefore inherently creative. We have the infinite source of all creation living inside us. Every day I wrote this book, I prayed for access, a Mary-sized portion, to be clear, so my head didn't explode, but a Mary-sized portion to the overlapping shore where his infinite well of wisdom met his infinite well of creativity, and the overlapping shore created this alchemy of an explosion of new ideas. And if we think about that as, here's God who's a creative force, here we are made in the image of God, being creative beings. If we think about what is the opposite of that, what is the thing that's going to be the enemy of that? What is the opposite of light? The absence of light or darkness. What is the opposite of good? We could call that the absence of good. We could call that evil, or we could even call it apathy, which is an interesting conversation. What is the opposite of creative? It is this force that is actually incredibly unoriginal and must therefore attack those of us who are.
Yeah.
And so, I said, like, basically, like, fear is not that tethered to muse or melody or the original force of all creation, short of being able to throw its voice to sound like us, because if it sounded like Morgan Freeman, we could catch it every time.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to shapeshift, just as we kind of get a hold of it coming in the front door is perfectionism. It's a really slippery enemy, because then it sort of like Mystique from X-Men,
Yeah.
switches faces, switches masks, and comes in the side doors, overthinking.
Yeah.
Or self-sabotage or whatever. And so I said, fear is not a very creative guy, but he is a busy guy.
Mm-hmm.
And like any good, productive overachiever, he's learned to prioritize. And so if you're playing small and hiding in plain sight, he's not going to really bother with you. A little fear maintenance mode, perfectionism, or self-sabotage sprinkled in, and you are all set.
Mm-hmm.
But show up and do work that actually matters, that's going to change things, that's going to help people, that's going to set them free. And you better expect the mask to slip and that real snarling, teeth-bared face of fear to show just how ugly and venomous it actually is. It's going to show up in full force. You are now a level 1 threat.
Mm-hmm.
And we can actually use that to our advantage. If fear is so boring and uncreative and predictable, we can use it to predict that we're actually exactly on the right track, not the other way around, right? We think fear showed up. Oh, maybe I shouldn't do it. What if it was actually the opposite? And so we flip it we win when we flip it for this script. Good. Fear showed up. Good. I must actually really care about what I'm about to do.
Yeah, I like that. I must actually really care about what I'm about to do. Because I think so often, even sometimes as Christians, fear shows up, or we face just like a hard moment or a road bump on our path, and we're like, oh, that just means I must not be supposed to do this or something. Or we're like, oh, well, maybe God's saying I shouldn't do this because it's hard. And I feel like that's exactly where fear shows up, and it's like, well, yeah, it's hard, so you shouldn't do it.
That's right. Yeah.
Were there any practical things that kind of, as you were writing the book, that you found that helped you like just put fear in its place in like a simple way?
Yeah. So this, in my opinion, is the work of this book. It is the singular work of this book, which is, we learned this all the way back when I was a photographer and we were teaching other photographers with our courses, is that human beings are wired to learn and remember and have recall best from story and unexpected, very visual, visceral metaphor. The greatest teacher that walked the planet talked in story and unexpected metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
Mustard seed? What?
Yeah.
Right? And when the people didn't get what Jesus was talking about, he was like, and he didn't go, okay, so this actually stands for this, and this is an imagery for that. He said, here's another metaphor.
Yeah.
And so here's the deal, Courtney. Like, we get so immersed in fear that we aren't even aware that's what's happening. They say, like, the fish don't know the water's toxic because they're so submerged in it.
Mm.
And so the work of this book is to almost become like, in addition to being like a handbook and like a, the missing handbook we never got growing up, and like a field guide as we go up the mountain, it's almost like an old school flip Facebook, which I'm old enough to, when I was in law school, we actually had printed Facebooks. That's why it's called that, is that colleges used to have these things. I was also at Yale when the Facebook we all
Came out.
know came out, so we were the second school to get it. So
Wow.
I am OG Facebook
Yeah,
in both senses
I love
of
that.
the word. And so I kind of think of it as like the Facebook for all the different masks that fear tries to
Mm,
put on. And I'm going to give you really unexpected visual metaphors that are impossible to forget.
yeah.
So, for example, in chapter 4, which is second guessing is a missing handbook, every hard story person I know in real life feels like they missed out on getting the handbook everybody else seemed to get.
Yeah.
So they always feel like someone else is going to show up better. They always want to bow out and push somebody else forward because they feel like I just don't know all the information.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part where I say we walk around in the world feeling like we don't have all the pertinent parts. Like Edward Scissorhands drop down right in the middle of some color-coded pastel suburban hell where we break the rules because we do not know the rules. Somehow we are the ones who die death by 1,000 cuts. And I also kind of go through this very visual description of what this imaginary handbook would look like. And so because it's unexpected and it's visceral and it's visual and it's just like you connect those two things in a way that you haven't seen them connected before, so you remember them better, the next time you're going, oh, I don't feel like I have all the information. I feel like other people know this, but how to do this better. You go missing handbook or Edward Scissorhands. And the faster you can catch it in the act, name it out loud for what it is, the
Mm-hmm.
faster all of its power just whooshes right out of the room. I was on This Changes Everything podcast with Sarah Rice, and she said, yeah, it's like in The Wizard of Oz, the
Yeah.
great and powerful Oz. As
Yeah.
like the cowardly lion runs away, Toto pulls back the curtain and we just see a small man behind it. And I said, yeah,
Yeah.
a snake oil salesman
Yes.
who's selling us on a grift.
Yeah.
And that grift is that fear is the biggest, most powerful voice in the room. But all we got to do is name it, pull back the curtain, and it loses all its power. And so
Yeah.
as I was writing this book, and let me tell you, you want to see fear show up in your life? Write a book about how to take down
Write a
fear.
book about it.
And the ways that it has showed up, we've had 2 cars die. We've
No.
had my Facebook account get hacked twice. We've had 3 major appliances die. We're
Yeah.
sending out these boxes. All the stuff got delayed coming in. Like, it has been comical if it wasn't so frustrating. But
Yeah.
it's like, really, fear? You're so boring. Like
Yeah.
2 of my 3 launches, the car died. 2 of my 3 launches, the Facebook account got hacked. 3 of my 3, the appliance. And it's like, you just use the same things over and over again. You're
Yeah.
boring.
Yeah.
But as that kind of, I want a part of that prayer, in addition to the overlapping shore of wisdom and creativity, was to peel the icy grip of fear off my shoulders. And the practical, active work I did to do that was to go research Riptide, Princess and the Pea problem, Oliver Twist problem. I feel like I'm missing the handbook. Oh, right. My Voice Doesn't Matter is like one of the classic boring scripts. And I say in the book that fear is going to attack you at the precise crosshair intersection where your gifts meet your story, because it knows you need both to make the impact you were created to have. If you only focus on your gifts, you are a clanging gong, a clanging cymbal, whatever. It is that empathy, what your heart breaks for, that your story adds, that actually is really what keeps your purpose going when it gets hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's going to, if you have a gift of words, it's going to tell you your voice doesn't matter. So when I heard my voice doesn't matter,
Yeah.
when my engagement tanked, when my emails were going to spam, when people were not liking that post, your voice doesn't matter. I said, oh, fear, you're so boring.
Yeah.
I must be really writing some good stuff if you showed up this hard today. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that spiritual warfare is so real. And I love that the last thing you just said is like, it'll like the thing you are good at or thing that God has called you to, that's where it'll be like, oh, well, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I've felt that before too.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well,
what is that gifting? Is it words? Is it?
Words, yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it's writing and speaking and my creativity. Even
Mhm.
even though I've been designing and doing marketing stuff for 10 plus years, even now, sometimes I'll send out a concept and it's like, that's not good enough because it doesn't look like so-and-so's. And it's like comparison will be that like fear tactic that it'll
Yep.
use to be like, well, you know, you don't have this many things, so like you're not going to get published or whatever. So yeah, it's definitely been something I've had to continually fight. And, you know, I'll even put like scriptural words of affirmation on like my mirror and things to remind me like, no, you are called, you are this, this, like kind of the truths that I know combat those lies. And
which is the work of your book.
Yeah.
Right. It is written, right? That's what it's called. It is written.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you know about those lies, and
I do, but
we're going to battle it back.
Susceptible. It's like, 100%. Even though I wrote a book about it and it came out in 2018 and I've helped so many other people overcome lies, it's like I still battle them too. It's like no one's immune to them, but we just get better and faster at being like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah. But I love the book that you're doing. And kind of one of the last questions I always love to ask every guest, because it's called the Trailblazer Talks, what is one piece of advice that you have learned on your trail in life that you want to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, I did a post a couple of days ago that's basically was talking about it's been about we're getting close to 6 years, but about 5 years ago that I signed a 5 book deal. And we'll just say five
Mm-hmm.
because the fives are nice. They're repeating 5, 5,
Yeah.
5. 5 years ago, 5 book deal. And I said it kicked off 5 of the hardest years of my life.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the suspected ways that that would be hard of like being, in writer's block or face down on the floor, feeling like I don't have any more words in me, or like I wrote this whole first version of my first book, Dirt, and it was not what I wanted it to stand for. And I was told my editor, we're going to gut it and redo it with only 2 months left. She said, that's fine as long as you hand it off on time. I already run one marathon and I have to run another one to get this real version of it out in the world. And so there are all the things, then launching is hard. And, are you going to get a bunch of yeses or a bunch of no's? Is any of it going to move the needle? Whatever. There's all of the things that are like actually a part of the job of being an author. And then there's like all the unexpected, like the ones I was just joking about, like the appliances or the car
Mm-hmm.
or other people. Critics are going to come. Like, I'm not
Yeah.
going to sugarcoat it for you. Critics are going to come for you. When Dirt came out, before it was actually out and it was just the cover and the title, there was a whole hometown thread I was never supposed to see. We'll say 85%, 85 to 90% of my hometowners, super, super like supportive, have been amazing. But there was just like the bitter few or what have you
Yeah.
in a Facebook thread I was never meant to see, of just like saying all of these lies. People
Mm.
who I legitimately never met. They moved to the town after I left. They did not
Yeah.
know me, but
Yeah.
they knew all about me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so the critics are going to come, but the work that we are doing here is more important than the worst of your critics. So yes, the thing that I've learned as a trailblazer and all of that is, in the post I talked about, it kicked off 5 of the hardest years of my life. And I think if on day one, when I was signing that contract, I knew what was coming, it's like if I got like a movie montage of it,
Yeah.
one whoosh, I could see it all at once, I think I would have run away.
Mm.
I've wanted to write books since I was 5 years old, and I am not an easily shaken person. I was a full-time entrepreneur for 20 years before I signed my book deal. And so that should tell you something of just like
Yeah.
how hard it's been, of like lifelong dream, very resilient person, very gritty person.
Mm-hmm.
There's a possibility I would have said, maybe not, if I saw it all at once. And so the thing I would say is, you will not know the whole staircase when you start. And that's actually a gift. It's actually a gift, because if you knew what the climb was going to require of you, you might turn tail and run every time. There's a reason we are only given our daily bread, manna from heaven, just enough for the day ahead. Tomorrow has troubles of its own. We are given just enough for the step in front of us, and the step in front of us, and the step in front of us. And then you look up and you've made it to the mountain. And more importantly, you made it to the mountain with some muscles that are going to keep you there. So don't rush the blueprint. Don't rush knowing all the steps, and don't not start because you don't have those things. One step at a time. I think that's a song.
Yeah.
There's no need
Yeah.
to rush. It's like falling in love. No, all of it, all of it. Just we don't know all the staircase, and we're not meant to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so important. I think sometimes we often want to know the whole staircase because we're just like, I just want to know, like, is it going to happen or is it going to be this? Like you said,
Yeah.
it can definitely be scary if you were to know the whole thing. And
Yeah.
I've heard it said too, like, if God were to, sometimes we want the whole cake at one time instead of just a piece of the cake. But if God gave us the whole cake at once, it might make us sick.
Yeah.
And I just love that piece of advice. I think it's so applicable no matter where you are in life. If you're in the corporate world, if you are a stay-at-home mom, if you are a fellow author like us, or want to start something like this, like, it's applicable no matter what season of life you find yourself in.
Yeah.
And the last thing I always love asking, just to wrap it up with, what is just something that's bringing you joy lately that we can maybe find or explore or share that joy with you?
Yeah, I got to give a shout out to my sort of like, I want to call him like my solitude circle, or whatever. My husband, Justin, and our 2 dogs, Goodspeed and Atticus. Like, I am a huge introvert. That's a very important thing to know about me. It doesn't always come across that way. I can seem extroverted, but I'm a huge, huge, huge introvert. I get all of my energy in solitude. And when I say solitude, I count the 3 of them and like our home, like our bubble. And so, I go and I do these, and as much as I adore conversations on podcasts, especially like this, because it's one-on-one and it's like immediately we go deep, like that does give me amounts of energy. But as an introvert, I still always have to
Mm-hmm.
recover. And so the end of the day, we call it couch time, Marantz 4 on the couch, my husband, the 2 dogs, and me, dinner on the couch, snacks on the couch, movies, shows we're watching, whatever. It's like my power up time. And so the dogs in particular are really earning their like comfort dog status, they're like support dog status. They're like, you look like you need a hug. And then my husband, Justin, is like, give him every gold medal, like, husband of the year. Like as we're doing this right now, he's downstairs assembling boxes that are going to be shipped out. And he has just been the absolute rock. And so in the back, in the acknowledgments, like his acknowledgement paragraph is like the whole page. And then like the other ones are normal sized, I said to him literally even today, right before I hopped on, I was like, I just want to remind you of the size of your acknowledgments, and you're just continuing to earn that every day. Yeah. Yes, it is reflective of the work that is being done. So I'm very, very lucky to have that kind of, soft place to land, and that like balance to the up and the down of launching books, because it's
It's a
wild
lot.
out here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you guys are doing a great job with it
Thank
too.
you.
I've been seeing your Instagram stories and all the pieces you're doing. And I know that a lot of that gets put on the author nowadays than it probably used to.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're
Yes,
doing
it
great.
does. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. As we're recording this, it's just a couple days. I think it's 4 days. Yeah. 4 days to launch. And this is the like, they say like in birth, the transition is the hardest part. It's when people most want to give up, but it's right before something new comes into the world.
Yeah.
That's where we are. It's like, let's give up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's very joy filled. And then I'll just add actually one other thing is it has been hilarious and beautiful and redeeming to me that a book about being the underdog and feeling overlooked and feeling like I'll do it myself, besides just all the circumstances, like my Facebook account and like Instagram engagement is horrible and whatever, emails are going to spam. I have been blown away. Like, I've never seen this happen in my life this way before, Courtney, of the number of people, generally women in particular, who have just like thrown open the door. Come on my show. Let me send an email to my list. Let me post on my social media. Let me like share your post. Let me encourage this. Let me like talk about your book on my launch day. Like, what is happening right now? And so like this whole launch has been teaching me a lot about what I talk about in chapter 10 is it's really hard for me to ask for help. And this whole like acting like you don't need people is a really great way not to have any. And I just feel like that's the work that God's working on me next. I was on a podcast, and this woman, Heather from Don't Mom Alone, said to me, I feel like the work of writing this book was you figuring out how you could become the grown up in the room who can be trusted. She said, I wonder what it looks like for you to trust some other grown ups in the room now.
Yeah.
And I was just like,
that's good. Like, oh, you grab a tissue.
I'll think about that for 100 years.
Yeah. Well, no. And I think too, it's because the message of this book is one that we all, whether we admit it or not, have deeply felt.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the thing when you write a book. It's like, what does the felt need? Well, you've definitely nailed it with this book. And so I think that should be something that like helps you sleep well at night too with it. It's just like, I wrote something that I know is going to help people.
That's right.
And it's going to help further them too. And it helped yourself through the process, which is so cool.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, people have been asking, and I've said, like, my goal for this book, truly, because of who that most target reader is nothing short of generational change. Yeah. It is nothing short of, my friend Hannah Brencher talks about a Sharpie mark through the calendar that divides it into a before and after. So a Sharpie mark through the family tree that divides it into a before and after. Like, I feel like when that group of people gets set free from this icy grip of fear, this, limiting beliefs tied up around their ankles, like, I just have this picture of them, like, sprinting ahead to the work they were created to do. And I just hope I get like a glimpse of it. So I feel like it's going to send shockwaves around the world instead of ripple effects,
I think so too. Yeah. Well, how can everyone connect with you? I know the book, we'll link all the things below in the show notes where they can find the book, but I'm sure it's sold in most bookstores. But how can they connect with you? Any other resources you want to make sure they know about? Yeah. All of that.
Yeah, I have 2 fun things I'll point your people to. The first is that in Slow Growth, I introduced these 5 achiever types for the first time, but they actually carry over into Underestimated of like how the achiever types play small and how, they get stuck and how they can move forward. And so we have the performer who's always on their toes, needs to show themselves, but for sure other people, how far they've come. I am the classic performer. There's the tightrope walker who could care less who else is clapping, but they need higher and higher death-defying feats to feel the same amount of good. Our masquerader does a very tricky sleight of hand where they push other people into the spotlight so nobody notices them shrinking back into dark corners. Our contortionist is the classic people pleaser. They contort because it is easier than to be criticized, and our illusionist in the distance believes that all the conditions to begin and they themselves must be perfect before they even start. And so if you go to achieverquiz.com or marymarantz.com/quiz, my last name is Marantz, Marantz like dance, achieverquiz.com. It takes 2 minutes to take the quiz, 10 minutes if you overthink it. And the questions are going to be super light and easy, but the results, we're going to go really deep. And I'm going to tell you what your type is, how you play small, and where we move forward from here. So that's achieverquiz.com. And then if you go to namethefear.com, depending on when this comes out, for sure we'll have the whole first chapter up there for you that you can download and read for free today to get a feel for that visual storytelling, a feel for that humor, that very lyrical writing. That's starting over as a rolling boulder, and you can download that right there. And then I'm at Mary Marantz on Instagram. Come tell me what your achiever type is.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll link everything in the show notes too, so you guys can just check that and just click right over. It'll be so good. But Mary, thank you so much for coming on the show and just sharing your heart and your wisdom. It's been such a joy.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.